Hi, this is Aaron Currier, and just wanted to say I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you just a little bit about some of the questions that you emailed to me and kind of move on to this portion of the interview. So you initially had started talking about my educational leadership philosophy, and whenever I think about that, I always end up going back to the rigor, relevance, relationship things that we hear and talk so much about in education. And when you think about rigor, I just want to break those down just a bit briefly, each individually. Really, for me, it's an unwavering belief that all students can learn, and I really emphasize all because it's something that we say as educators, and it's difficult sometimes when push comes to shove to really believe that all students can learn, because sometimes we try things, whether it be behaviorally or academically or otherwise, and they don't work, and it's very easy to get caught up in conversations about the difficulties and the fact that we don't see the growth that we see that we would like to see through a plan or intervention. And but if we really approach every single conversation with that belief that all students really can learn, that's when we really begin to eventually see opportunities with students and with kids, even our most challenging students, and we start to see that growth that we maybe otherwise wouldn't have had the opportunity to. So that one's very close and dear to me. But also with that rigor comes the willingness to challenge them accordingly. Kids that are doing very well, and even maybe kids that we don't necessarily think have that potential, but to be willing to go out and challenge them just to see if they'll rise to the occasion. So I think that rigor piece is extremely important, and as part of my educational leadership philosophy, I think that's important, to make sure that's an expectation and something that we talk about. Also, a consistent focus on connecting with students in order to cultivate a culture of learning through discovery, to build an intrinsic love of learning within each student. And I think any school district that really is working with kids and really wants to see something that lasts beyond them wants to instill a love and a lifelong love of learning in their students. And I think part of the way we do that is by making our curriculum and the things that we're teaching them relevant to them. We really want them to get into that phase of discovery where we're not just teaching them and placing things into them and asking them to regurgitate, but we're giving them opportunities to really discover on their own. And I think that's really when kids begin to really take ownership in their learning, and that's when they begin to have a love for it and that whole process that they go through to do so. And as teachers and as educators, by making what we're showing them and what we're introducing to them relevant is when we really start to see students start to grasp on and get that genuine love of this process of learning. And relationships is equally as important as the other two. And without relationships, I don't think you really can have anything else as far as rigor or relevance or anything for that matter in a school, because students really need to walk in, and parents at the same time need to be able to walk into a school and feel like this is a place where I'm welcomed, I'm appreciated, I'm important, I matter. And I think as teachers and as leaders, we need to lead by example and really show students what that feels like. And that's, once those relationships have been established, I think that's when kids can really be more open to learn from us, because if they walk in and they don't really feel like we appreciate them or we care about them, they don't really want to learn from us. And we desperately need to have those relationships established. And as leaders, we need them established with our staff, we need them established with our community, so we too can drive that piece of trust that's so important when we're working with kids. And I always add an additional at the end of this, an additional R for relentlessness, because I think that that is just as important a piece, because we really need to go through the process of rigor, relevance, relationship, and what we need to do it relentlessly, with just an ability never ever to stop and quit or slow down, but constant moving forward. And I think that's important when you think about working through all three of these things and everything that goes with them. It's easy to kind of get caught up and to slow down, but part of my vision is just a constant pressing forward and always looking to improve constantly. And I think that relentless piece is important to that. You had also asked me to address being a part of a highly functioning team and what I think that looks like, and an example of when I did that. I think a highly functioning team is one that's very collaborative, it's productive, it's very easy to get into a group of people and have a conversation and not necessarily have that conversation be very productive. I mean, it sounds like a great conversation, but what comes out of it? What is the fruit of the time spent together? And I think along with collaboration, that productive piece is equally as important. And you do that by staying focused. And as a group that's highly functioning is able to do those things. They work well together, they have a good time, but they're also productive and focused on the task at hand. An example for me would be, I was an upper elementary principal in a district where there was an upper elementary school that I was the principal of and 2 lower elementary schools. And the 3 of us would meet, and we would also meet with our assistant superintendent of curriculum, and the superintendent would meet with us. And we were a very highly functioning team. We knew how to get together, and we had an agenda, and we had a process that we went through when we met to follow that agenda and make sure we took good notes of what we were talking about. And then when the meeting was over, everyone knew exactly what we were leaving with. If there was a job or a task that someone needed to do, action items that needed to be acted upon, everyone knew what those were when we left that meeting. And I think that was a very good example of a very well-functioning, a highly functioning team that I participated on. When I looked through the state data for MSTEP, and obviously MSTEP data is fairly new, so we have to take it a bit with a grain of salt. But what it is good at is kind of comparing students in a district with their peers on a statewide level. And what I did for your school is I looked at 3rd and 4th grade MSTEP assessment data. And I looked at language, arts, math, and science. That was the data available, and obviously science was just available for 4th grade students. And both in language, arts, and math, students were really at or even exceeding their peers on average across the state. And even though those scores were low, if you think of their 50th percentile, 60th percentile, we really want our students to be excelling that, but we really don't know exactly what this MSTEP data is showing us totally yet, because it's a very new test. So we need some years worth before we can really get an idea. But comparatively, this school is doing similar to those, across the state, and I think, or even exceeding, and I think that's a good thing. In science, what I noticed was that it was a bit below the state average, but the state average itself is also at like 12%. We've had that issue in Michigan for a while now with science, but still, I think it's something not to necessarily just assume is a result of the assessment issues that we've had with science or the lack of a curriculum necessarily that we've had in science, but I think it's still something to focus on and look at. And what I would do is to begin to work with teachers to implement the new state science curriculum that we do have now, and really focus on those new expectations, because if you look at NGSS, which our new science standards are focused on, are kind of based from, those are really, it's a completely new way of looking at science. It's a really, if you look at the verbs in the standards, they're really asking kids to create models, and not just to understand, but really go through the process of creating models and doing presentations and really having a deep understanding of all of these different standards. And I think that's a really good conversations for teachers to have, and I think once we start going through that process, we'll start to see science scores improve as well. But also, even with language arts and math and social studies, also just allow teachers that time to collaborate together. I'm sure that's already taking place, but to really give teachers the tools that they need to focus that collaborative time to really work well together, to be focused. You think about highly functioning teams, really teachers have that ability too, and I'm sure there are highly functioning teams already there. But really to give them protocols and tools to use in those conversations to drive the conversations and really provide some outcomes when they leave those meetings of, this is what we're going to do next. This is what we're looking at. Let's look at it, see what we can do with it, take some data, focus on it, break it apart, and then also leave with some action plans for everybody to participate in and work through, and then come back and revisit that conversation. And I think giving teachers that time is extremely important when you want to look at how to improve curriculum, how to improve teaching. Really, we need to get teachers talking together, but also guide those conversations as leaders to really start to see drastic changes in the classroom. My experience with resource allocation and management, the school that I was the principal at was a 4, 5, 6 building, so it had 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. It had about 700 students, plus or minus. So you can imagine there was a bit of resource allocation and management just to really run a school of that size. We were a Title I school, so I did have 4 intervention personnel that worked for me. So I had a separate budget with Title I money for them, but we also had purchased in previous years some iPads with Title I money that had to be obviously carefully labeled and used for specific purposes. So, I was responsible for all of that, and also for the budget that went with the school, individual teacher budgets, and all of the functions that came along with, field trips, PTO, different activity accounts, the budget itself for the school, for supplies, all of that was my responsibility. So as far as my experience with that goes, running a school that size kind of brings with it a lot of experience. What would I do myself to maintain increased enrollment at a pre-K4 school? I think going back to when I was talking about my vision and the relationships piece, that's really where it's at with this. Just really understand your community, know them, know how they communicate, be out there, be present. Don't be a principal that's in the office and people may or may not know who you are. I think it's important that people know who the face of the building is and they know who leads it, but they also know that this is someone they can come and approach. And people talk, and when they know that they have someone that is responsible for a building that loves and cares for their kids, that will be an advocate for them and for the school, they talk and they'll tell other people why this is a great place to come. And I think just constantly pressing and pushing that message and also standing for it and representing it is the best thing that any principal can do to maintain their enrollment but increase it at the same time. My experience with an effective evaluation process, the school I was at was fairly large, so I was responsible for all of the staff, but personally I evaluated over 30, and these were all full-time teachers. I was in the rooms at least 4 times a year with feedback, having conversations throughout the school year with each one of them. The evaluation process for me was very near and dear. It is, in my opinion, the most important part of, or at least one of the most important part of any principal's job, is really to be out there inside classrooms, having conversations with kids, having conversations with teachers. This is what I saw. This is what worked really well. This is what I think maybe we can work on. And teachers really enjoy, once a relationship is established that's trust-based, teachers really appreciate that feedback and having those conversations. And so I've had a lot of experience working with teachers, and I've just got some amazing stories of teachers who have, had some great gains just based off of sitting down and having a face-to-face collaborative conversation about this is what's working, and really teachers reflecting on them, what they saw, what they can recall of their own lesson, and then getting my feedback of what I saw, and then having that conversation of what can we do to make this better next time. I think this is a very powerful piece, and it's something I love about being an educational leader, is just being able to go through that process with teachers. One example of a professional disagreement I had with a colleague was I had a colleague who really wanted to change the structure of the way I did special education at my building, and without going into large details of the structure and the process and everything, this teacher basically approached me and said that a large number of people in the building had approached her and said that they really would like a change in the special education structure. And I knew that wasn't the case, but I wanted to validate what this teacher was saying. And Todd Whitaker, if you're familiar, has write some great books for educational leaders, and he wrote one called Shifting the Monkey, and he approached this very issue, and he said the best thing you can do in this kind of situation is to react as if this was your best teacher. You would give them credence. You would look into it. So I did that. I sent out an email to my entire staff. I invited anyone who was interested in having a conversation about the pros and cons of our structure to come to a meeting. And everyone came, including this teacher, And when we were done, we had a very, very long list of the pros of why it should stay the way it was, and we had a very, very short list of cons. And I didn't make a decision. I didn't just completely dismiss this teacher's opinion. But what I did was I brought their colleagues together because they approached me with the opinion that everyone believed this. So we all came together and I let them make that decision and really solidify the decision that I had already made together. But we did it as a team. And I think that was just a great way to handle it and something that worked really well. I'm going to be brief here because I know I'm already over 15 minutes and I apologize. But something I championed that was important for students that not necessarily everybody agreed with. In my building, we had a lot of times where students had to participate in indoor recess, and because our playground got muddy, and so I basically headed a number of incentives and options inside where kids would be able to move safely, and it involved, without going into great detail, some moving of some things physically in the building, and there was a lot of pushback because people were used to things being a single way. But once those things were done, because I kind of pushed forward with it because I know the research on kids being able to move, once it was done and once kids were allowed to really actively move safely inside the building, after a number of weeks, teachers really began to see the benefit of allowing for that movement, especially at this level. And so that was just something simple that I did to really push forth something that I knew was important for kids, but that did take a little bit of pushback from people that I had to kind of move forward with. So I'm going to stop. I'm not going to give too much of a wrap up at the end because I know I'm already over time, but I appreciate you taking the time to view this. I would hope that you'd let me know if you have any questions, and I wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you.